Hello, good evening, good evening. This is thrilling for us to see so many of you here. I think we've set a record for the Institute for Public Knowledge. Several years ago, we had this sociologist Matt Desmond here for when he was launching this book, Evicted, and it was a way smaller crowd. So I'm expecting that this project will be far more successful than that book. That was an inside joke for those of you who are following sociology. My colleague David Garland got it in the front. Welcome everyone to the Institute for Public Knowledge and for New York University. Can you hear me okay in the back? Is sound carrying? Fantastic. Thank you, sound people at NYU. You're saying louder? Well, I'm going to be screaming, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to try to sustain it. My name is Eric Kleinenberg. I am the director of the Institute for Public Knowledge, also on the faculty in sociology here, and I'm playing a lot of roles tonight. I am going to be moderating, but also speaking about this project, and then joining us all in conversation. For those of you who are new to the Institute for Public Knowledge, we are a provostial initiative that crosses all the different schools at NYU, from the arts and sciences to law and public policy, engineering, medicine. People from all over the university participate in the research projects that we do and the gatherings we do. And we really aim to be a kind of public platform and face for the university that sits at the intersection between the research that our faculty and students do and the worlds that we're embedded in here, from the neighborhood to the city to the country, and a more global scale as well. And tonight's event is really special because it touches on core themes from our work that we've been doing for many years now, and I think it's directly tied to the civic life of the city. I'm going to get into the details of it in a minute, but part of what makes this moment so exciting is that I think we're all here on the one hand feeling the pressure and the stress of just being in the United States in 2026 and having all the uncertainty that comes with this precarious and dark moment. But I think for all of us sitting in New York City today, we also feel like there's this kind of brightness that we are living in at a very local level, and a sense of opportunity and possibility, and we're all thinking about, how do we live better together in a more joyous way, in a more accessible way, in a more participatory way, in a more engaged way. And part of that story that our mayor has told so well is about access and affordability and economic security, and 100% to yes to all those things. And also, if we all had economic security, then the question would be like, how do we make good lives? How do we find each other and live meaningful lives? And this project, which you're going to hear about in a moment, is really dedicated to that. So welcome to our event. Wait, I'm going to switch. That's our event. Social infrastructure is essential infrastructure. That is the big idea that we want to convey tonight. And we want to talk about the idea. We also want to talk about what it would mean for us to take seriously social infrastructure as a policy idea. What would it mean to have an infrastructure project that was about this kind of infrastructure? So the format for tonight is I'm going to speak for a little bit and tell you a kind of overview of some of the big findings from a project. I should say at the outset that this conversation is built upon an incredible grant that the Institute for Public Knowledge got from the U.S. Department of Education. We had advocates in the offices of Senator Charles Schumer, who really went to bat for NYU and the Institute for Public Knowledge for us to do this research, and many people participated in this project. In addition to the federal government, you're about to learn about research done with community partners in a number of places: Flatbush, the Lower East Side, and Poughkeepsie. And I want to give a special thank you to a few people and institutions that really stepped up. Those of you who know me well will not be surprised to learn that among the most participatory and enthusiastic partners for us in this project were librarians from the New York Public Library and also from Poughkeepsie. The Educational Alliance, and Rich Baum, who's here, was really kind of a major supporter of us from the beginning. mass design in Poughkeepsie, which helped to help us get to know this town, which we didn't know all that well when we started, and the Poughkeepsie Children's Cabinet. So a quick shout out to all of those institutions and people for your help. Thank you. Okay. This project had a number of people from NYU and the Institute for Public Knowledge, who you meet in a second, but one of the amazing things about this project is it was a partnership from the beginning with the people at Gell Architecture and Design. They have been extraordinary partners, and they've really pushed us out of our comfort zone in the university to think about how to work and engage communities and to think about city making in a different way. Tonight, joining me on the panel after I present will be Julia Day, who's a partner and director at Gell, and she leads the New York office, although I don't think that's right. Now you're in Copenhagen, and she's just flown back to be away from the mothership in Copenhagen and come back to New York City, where she did this big project. So Julia, would you mind just standing up and waving for a second? You'll come up on the stage, but Julia's been great. And Candace and Precious and Eamon we'll introduce you more in a little bit. Then I think the real reason there's so many people here is actually not that we're here. It's that we thought, like, who are the two people we'd most like to come and comment on this, and they both said yes. So we have Maria Torres Springer, who's now the president of the Charles Revson Foundation, which has been a big supporter of our work on social infrastructure and a big part of the story of social infrastructure support. The foundation has been a great supporter of the library and many other civic institutions in New York. But Maria, as many of you know, is just a force of nature in New York City. She was a deputy mayor. She was the head of the EDC. And we're really honored by your presence. Thank you. If you don't mind, just... And then because we also really want to be in conversation with the powers that be in the mayor's office and in the city right now, because we're not here. This is not an academic exercise this evening. We're not here. Just to study and learn. We're also here because we'd like to change the city, and how fortunate we are to have someone who feels the same way, who's also leading one of the most important offices in New York City. Louise Young is the new Chief Climate Officer for New York City in the Mamdani administration, someone who has been a long-time activist for climate and for the environment and for social justice. I can't wait to see what you're going to do these next few years. But we have some ideas for you. So if you don't mind just turning around and waving. Okay, they're going to come up and join me in a second. Awkward role shift happening right now. Let's start. Now this is me, and I want to share with you what this project's all about. So the introductions are over. Are you all ready? Can we get into this now? Okay, here we go. We're going to talk about social infrastructure. So this project began years ago for me with the Revson Foundation. In a conversation with Julie Sandorf, Maria's predecessor, we talked about an institution that has incredible significance in the life of New York City, the public library, and we cooked up a project that turned into something much bigger than either of us had anticipated. I wrote a book called Palaces for the People, in which I introduced and kind of redefined a concept that had been around Europe but not much in the United States, the idea of social infrastructure. And because I'm guessing that not everybody uses social infrastructure in your daily life, before we get going, I just want to give you the definition that I developed that we've used in this project. And the idea is that social infrastructure refers to the physical places that shape our capacity to connect with each other. That if you're in Europe and someone says social infrastructure, they might mean like the education sector or the healthcare sector, but that's not what we mean it, how we mean it. We have a very specific idea of it in mind. And it's not a metaphor. When we say social infrastructure, the idea is like in the same way that there's an infrastructure that supports electricity or transit or communication, there's also an infrastructure for social life. And if we build it well and design it well, we get all kinds of returns to our collective life. But if we don't, we really feel the absence of it, right? That's the original idea. And when I wrote the book, the organizing metaphor was the idea of a palace for the people, right? An idea that it's not just social infrastructure that we care about. We really are interested in places that welcome us, that dignify us, that lift up everyone who uses them. That's our kind of ideal of what good social infrastructure could be. And the book came out in 2018. It was a very different world there then. I don't know if any of you remember 2018, but it feels like a very long time ago. And one of the things that was strange is like when I wrote this book, the library was a symbol that unified us. You know, people could agree. If you're talking to people on Team Red or Team Blue, they could agree that the library was a valuable community institution. These days, the library is under fire, right? As are so many sources of unification. We just don't have access to them in the same way. They've taken on this different meaning. And our feeling here at IPK was that we needed to revisit this question about what social infrastructure is and how it matters, in part because there are a number of different crises that we are concerned about, and we mentioned the climate crisis, and I've been writing a lot recently about how we can address the climate crisis through social infrastructure, for instance, the sponge city idea, parks that can absorb water. But there are other crises that I think we spend a lot of time talking about that have an infrastructural quality to them, infrastructural absence at the heart. And one is this kind of crisis of social connection. Is often framed as an epidemic of loneliness. I don't love that formulation, but I think most people feel these days that we're just not able to be with each other in a way that feels fully satisfying. Of course, we're concerned about the fragility of democracy, our incapacity to engage in civic life. Maybe civility might not be your thing. You might think this is not the moment for civility. There's a battle going on. But our capacity to engage in civic life is a real issue, as is the problem of inequality. And as I mentioned earlier, the big picture context is, I think a lot of us now are imagining what it might be like to live in a new New York, to live in a transformed city, a place that can become more joyful, not just more equal, yes, but also more joyful and more accessible and more affordable. Right? I think that is the project that millions of us in New York feel like we want to be part of right now. And we want to contribute to that conversation. And we thought returning to social infrastructure might be a way to do that. Now, I'm aware this is a very big room, and these are very small letters on the slide. So don't even worry about those. Don't worry about. Just stop reading. I don't know why you're all looking at the screen. Look at me. What we're telling you in this slide is that there's a bunch of gaps that motivated this inquiry. There's a gap we found between what people want and need and what they actually have when it comes to gathering places in their lives, right? Going to a neighborhood and hearing residents say, you know, there's not a place for the kids to go at the end of the day. You know, talking to older people who don't know where they can go and have a fun social life. There's a gap between what people want and what they need in many places. There are also gaps across New York City neighborhoods, right? I'm a card-carrying member of the American Sociological Association, which means I can't talk to you without emphasizing the problem of inequality as a pressing problem for our democratic life. And if you live in a city and you know that some neighborhoods have an abundance of good gathering places, accessible places where they can forge connections and feel some sense of belonging, and others don't, that becomes a problem in and of itself. Right? That expression of inequality is something that dramatically decreases people's sense that they belong, that they have a voice, that their life is as good as it could be, and that's a problem we wanted to address. There is a gap, and Louise, you might not have heard this yet, but there's a gap between what people value and what the government delivers. Now, I know that's about to change. As soon as you hire your full staff, that will change. And Maria, I don't blame you totally for that, from your time as deputy mayor. There's another gap, which I think is important for us to think about these days, and it's a gap between, it's a specific and important one for a policy, between how the private sector benefits from great social infrastructure and what it contributes to it. Because no, the public space in the back alley behind a building that nobody can really get to is not adequate as a price for getting that right to build something. Like, how is it that the private sector could be a more active player in this is a big question. And finally, I think there's a gap between people's desire to activate local spaces, to really make them work, and what it takes to get there. Right, so all of these things are motivating our inquiry. And I say motivate our inquiry because, as you're about to learn, we're not really here to editorialize. What we've done over the last 18 months with GEL is mount what I think is the biggest social infrastructure research project that's ever been done. Nan Feng, who's one of our great postdocs here, is going to, I think will agree with this because Nan has been responsible for a lot of the quantitative work on this project. But we have a team of many people from IPK. There's Mike Konsowitz, and Mike is the associate director of IPK, and also a American historian and author who did an enormous amount of work trying to help us understand the deeper context for urban development. Matt Wolf, an ethnographer, an investigative journalist, an interviewer, and Nan Feng, who conducted this amazing survey. And then from Team GEL, Julia, Eamon O'Connor, who is the senior project manager and really kind of pushed GEL's New York contributions here, along with Candace G., Precious and Dakuba, and Helena Wolf. So this has been, all of us have been working together for the last 2 years on this project, and an enormous amount of research went into it. What we wanted to understand, the questions we wanted to answer involved learning what places function as social infrastructure in different communities, what are the places that people value. Then, what is it about the ways that they're designed, the ways that they're programmed, the ways they're maintained? Not very sexy as a topic, I know, but it turns out like massively consequential. I can tell you that as someone who grew up in the city of Chicago in the 70s and 80s, where we inherited lots of social infrastructure, which had basically been abandoned and left to rot. So like the playground was the place you would never spend time if you lived in the city of Chicago in the late 1970s and 1980s, because you knew that it was not going to be a safe place. The equipment wouldn't be nice, and the library doors were locked. So operations matter as well. How do you make these sites work if you have them? It's not enough just to say there they are. And then we also really wanted to know if there are factors that can support or detract from people's efforts to make social connections when they're in these places. And we did a really rigorous empirical study to try to do this. Again, don't worry about the words, but there was observation in real time of more than 3,000 people in public spaces in different parts of New York. We conducted an original survey in person with 1,100 people to learn about the nature of their time they spend in public places and the relationships they form there. We did dozens of interviews, focus groups, and then some GEL research techniques that we had never known here before, including working with young people as they walked around the city and did public space assessments in real time, a kind of eye-level city project where people talked about walked through different neighborhoods and showed us how they see them, and mapping exercises as well. 3 big communities that we looked at that have very different conditions, but I think together helped us understand something about social infrastructure generally. First is we really learned a tremendous amount from site visits and focus research in the town of Poughkeepsie. It's a kind of fascinating city where there is a long history of kind of a rich center city, a booming downtown that has lost a lot of its energy and lost a lot of resources in recent decades, and Poughkeepsie has been struggling to revive and revitalize, and we spent a lot of time with organizations and with people there trying to learn what's happened. We also spent a lot of time in Flatbush, in Brooklyn, and on the Lower East Side around us here. And just quickly to kind of characterize the 3 different places, what we found in the Lower East Side is a rich and diverse mix of gathering places, of social infrastructure sites that are connected in a walkable grid. If you live in this part of the city, you have access to a tremendous amount of gathering places. They are not always perfectly maintained. In some cases, they're closed much more than they need to be, which really can inhibit access for people who need it. But the wealth of social infrastructure on the Lower East Side really stands out as exemplary if you're lucky to have access to these kinds of things. In Flatbush, we found a buzzing corridor, kind of commercial streets that can sustain enormous amounts of social life and be a source of bonding, but a relative absence of access to parks, of community centers, of libraries, of playgrounds. People really felt a longing for more structured gathering places where they and their children and their family members knew that they would feel welcome and safe. And what's more, when it comes to climate, the commercial corridor on Flatbush can get very hot and uncomfortable, and that can be a real problem. So we have to think about how to build a more resilient public space there. In Poughkeepsie, we found tremendous social infrastructure sites, amazing gathering places, beset by the problem of disconnection because it's very difficult to get from one place to another. It's a place that's fairly car dependent. There's not great sidewalks. Some places the access from one area to another is blocked. There are a lot of places that aren't getting activated because the town lacks the resources to maintain and to staff places that otherwise could do a lot of good things. Just a couple more words from me on some of the big picture findings, the things that I think are a little more fine-grained, that were surprising and interesting, and that are important scientifically, but I think also for our conversation about what happens in public spaces. First of all, and a lot of this comes from the work of Nan Feng, who led this survey. One of the most important things that good social infrastructure does in a city or neighborhood is gives people a sense to feel like they belong, which is no small thing. When we spoke to people at social infrastructure sites, we were surprised to learn that more than 80% of the people who we found expressed a sense of real belonging in the place where we spoke to them. Like they should be there. They were at home there. That's something that matters. What's more than 70% of the people we interviewed in the survey recognized at least a few people in these sites. Didn't matter if it was a library or a sport court or a dog park. When people go to gathering places around their neighborhood, it's not that they feel a sense of belonging, they actually have some social ties to the people around them. Even kind of more improbably and surprisingly, more than 40%, nearly half of the respondents, engage in some kind of joint activity. And why does that matter? It matters because if we care about this problem of disconnection and social cohesion, it's not the case that people wake up in the morning thinking about where they could go to make friends and start a community. We're not really motivated, most of us, by the longing to build a community as a daily practice. We want to do things that are going to be fun and enjoyable. And if we do them recurrently with a shared set of people who share our interests, we're much more likely to build those relationships that can form into something much bigger and more significant. Right? And here it's important to note, people don't only meet their existing friends in social infrastructure sites. More than a third of people made new friends in the past year. And I just want to suggest that when you hear conversations about the crisis of social isolation or disconnection in America, you'll hear often 1 in 4 Americans doesn't have an intimate partner, intimate friend they feel comfortable sharing intimate conversations with. People feel lonely. This is no small thing, right? It's quite significant. A quick shout out to Matt Wolf, who in a kind of breakout ethnographic feature of this study, decided to spend time in the skate park in Tompkins Square. Any of you all been out in the skate park today skating? I didn't recognize some of you. Anyone raise your hand if you've been to the skate park in Tompkins Square. Okay, maybe like 20% of you, 10% of you. Why does this matter? Because have you been paying attention to the conversation out there about why is it that young men feel so disconnected? You aware of this conversation? Like, it's really bad for society to have a lot of young men who feel alienated and disconnected, right? Like, bad things happen in those situations. What do we want to do about it? Well, one of the things that Matt uncovered is there's this world of young guys who hang out in skate parks and build a whole series of supportive relationships across class, across age, they're actually really beautiful things. And it does make you wonder what kinds of sites we could be developing to build cohesion for other communities as well. Matt's got a lot more to say about that. Just a couple more things before I pass the microphone to Julia. There's a lot of social bonding that happens in our social infrastructure sites. More than 85% of the people who we interviewed say they like the places where we interviewed them. This is pretty amazing for people who study trust. I don't know if any of you are concerned about the level of distrust in the United States today, or even in New York City. It's another worrisome thing. Bad things happen to societies where we don't trust each other. More than 70% of the people at the sites we interviewed say that they trust other people who are there. More than 60% of people say they feel less alone or isolated when they're there. And I'm just going to give another shout out to the libraries because the figures are considerably higher there. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking like, okay, this kind of bonding, fine, but raise your hand if you're also thinking like, well, if you live in a segregated and unequal society, if you're bonding with other people who are like you in the site, you know, you might be exacerbating the inequalities, right? Because if you're bonding with just other people who are like you, you might actually be establishing more social distance from other. Anyone have that concern when I put up this slide? Okay, those of you who didn't raise your hand, you probably just can't see the letters there. So one last thing to know, there's actually tremendous amounts of bridging that happen here. Now, the bridging numbers are not as high because bridging, establishing social ties with people who are different from you, that doesn't happen as often. This is the United States after all. But where do we bridge? Where do we build those kinds of relationships? We found actually in these publicly accessible gathering places. More than half of the respondents we spoke to, and we asked this uncomfortable question and spent a lot of time sweating over how to ask questions like this because it is uncomfortable. But more than half of the people we spoke to report having interactions across racial or ethnic lines, and more than a third reported that they had cross-class interactions as well. They could identify other people they spoke to as belonging to a different social class, even here in the United States where class doesn't exist. And that's a really promising and important thing. There are a couple of other things that I wanted to tell you, but I think I'm going to save them for the conversation because I think that's a lot from me. What I want you to know is that we had kind of a rich set of specific findings from each of the sites, as well as some general ideas about the things that social infrastructure can and can't do. And I want to pass it to my colleague Julia Day from GEL, who's going to focus in on our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. It's a real honor to be working with you and your team. I think when Palaces of the People came out, I think we may have had like a book club at Gale. We all read it, we loved it, and your work on heat and infrastructure and social infrastructure as well. And so yeah, this has been, Gale is an urban design practice that has social science at its foundation. So the opportunity to work with such esteemed social scientists as are on the IPK team was a real honor for us and a great way to keep adapting the work we do. So you heard a lot about the findings. Thank you for that overview. I'm going to talk a bit about what we think this means in terms of recommendations. And then I think Maria and Louise will give us some more thoughts on what it means and what we can actually do about it. At the simplest level, the quality and the mix of social infrastructure in a place shapes how we connect. It determines whether connection happens at all, who participates, and what kind of relationships can form. And as you heard from Eric, we need many types of connection, not just because it makes us feel good, but because it has ripple effects on our communities and even society. And those types of connections range from meeting a familiar face, recognizing somebody on a street, to actually maybe befriending somebody, to forming trusting bonds. So really ranging from the individual to the community scale. And at Gale, we think a lot about, well, what does place have to do with it? And I think what this work showed is that it actually has a lot to do with it, and that when we invest in these high quality, which is well-programmed, well-maintained, accessible spaces, we're actually creating not just a place where you can meet your everyday needs, whether it's resting or playing or learning, but where you actually can form these social connections. And one of the things that really struck us in the research was that when people were asked what they were there for at a different social infrastructure site, they rarely said to socialize. They mentioned the thing they were doing. And we think that's really important because as we think about this crisis of connection and how we solve it, it may sound simple, but so much of what we can do actually comes to just making our everyday lives more convenient. So all of these individual and community scale connections actually lead to something bigger, these stronger networks, these stronger relationships, and ultimately larger civic outcomes. So that said, there's some incredible sites across the city, but rarely can one single space do everything for everyone. And we need a real mix of spaces. And that mix comes in the type of places you can go, the form that they take. That's indoor spaces, outdoor spaces, and a big finding, and this was the connector spaces in between is also so important. The streets, the sidewalks, both because those spaces can be social infrastructure in their own right, and also because they're so essential to connecting us to spaces. And Eric mentioned Poughkeepsie as an example. We saw there's some wonderful after-school programs there, but it takes high school students more than 25 minutes to get from high school to these sites, crossing major arterial roads with high-speed traffic, very low-quality crossings and sidewalks, and that's not just creating a distance between the spaces, but actually a deterrent to use. We need, in these networks, a mix of functions, a mix of things to do at different times of day, for different ages. Let me go back to this one. You need places to meet all these different kinds of needs, and then we also need to think about what are the outcomes these spaces are leading to. Are they actually creating a space where you can bond with people, or are they a space where you can bridge and meet people with different experiences than your own? And there's no magic formula to this. Each community will need something different, but it's really thinking about how these networks can work together. And we thought a lot. We had a historian on the team, but I think many of us have probably thought about the New Deal and things like it when we think about how can we invest in our public realm. And knowing the situation we have, why are we not acting? Especially when we have done it before, there's precedent. And to take us back less than 100 years, the New Deal alone in New York, 851 sites were created. That's parks and libraries. And there was philanthropic support, specifically the Carnegie Endowment, that created 67 library branches. Many of these sites we're still using today. Of course, it's not the 1930s, and the federal government looks a little different. But what we do see is that cities are really stepping up, New York in particular, but across the country, and modeling what resilient, cohesive communities can look like. We're seeing momentum across New York as well, renovated libraries, libraries being incorporated into affordable housing with blended financing between public and private partners. We're seeing upgraded rec centers. And we're seeing new funding models with recent announcements of philanthropy coming in to support some of the mayor's initiatives, such as around affordable childcare. So we applaud all of these things, and I do think a big hope with this research is that it can amplify all of that work being done by many of the people in this room. There are so many champions of social infrastructure here tonight. But we still see this big gap between what we know works and the level of ambition at which we're actually investing in the solutions. And even as a recent example, despite being top public priorities, parks and libraries are constantly having their budgets threatened. even though New Yorkers say, they cherish them and would love to see them invested in even more. So what does this mean specifically? Yes, you heard from Eric. There's a lot of love from libraries here. We have 6 recommendations. I'll go over them quickly, and then we have some ideas of how we can focus on them all together. The first is to supercharge the library. This means expanding staff hours, expanding programming, expanding on how and where they exist, thinking about how they can be co-located with housing, has been done, or with other community assets. This is a picture from Sunset Park Library, which was opened in 2023. Maybe Maria knows more about that, but there's 100% affordable housing above it. We know housing is a huge priority right now, so where are there opportunities to leverage the investments in housing and social infrastructure? Secondly, we really want to rethink recreation for all ages. A core finding in all of this work was the lack of indoor recreation spaces for especially young people across our study sites. So we need spaces that are not just functional, but actually inviting in all times of day, all seasons, places that you can play in, play of all ages, do athletics, arts, and informal socializing. We want to leverage the investments in social infrastructure with climate infrastructure and think about how these spaces can be more comfortable and resilient. We know heat and flooding are increasing. We need places where people can be outside safely, where they can be comfortable in the hot summer days. And we need to think about the nighttime uses. How does social infrastructure function at night for recreation, for essential workers? And how can we invest more in the things that actually bring climate comfort to the city, like the new forest plan that was just released? Fourth, we think we need to transform our streets into safe social neighborhood connectors. So this is both about making streets places in their own right, improving plantings, furnishings, creating spaces for people to rest and pause. It's also about activating the ground floor of buildings and making sure that when there is an indoor social infrastructure site, it's actually welcoming and inviting to people, that the quality of the streetscape actually lets people know they're welcome. This is showing Grand Army Plaza near Prospect Park. There was a recent announcement about the work to improve the access to the park here, make more space for people. This is a great example of how streets can support social infrastructure. But we know this is not just about the physical sites and the places. It's also about the people working alongside these sites. We need to make sure that we're staffing these places, we're funding organizers and community stewards who bring them to life. There's incredible programs in New York, activating open streets, communities watering their gardens with street trees. There's so many different ways you can get involved, but what we hear over and over again is that it's a patchwork system, the funding is fragmented, the ways to secure insurance are very varied. There's a lot of red tape in actually creating a community stewardship program and one that actually has the funding needed. So we want to make sure that we're hiring and partnering with communities to run and activate these sites. And then we also need to know what's out there and what exists in order to get started. So we want to know what's working well, where are the assets, and where are the gaps, and how can we actually understand this at a neighborhood level so we can start to pinpoint key priorities. And then when we think about all of this together, at the end of the day, we are planners at Gale, and we kept coming back to this idea of a social infrastructure plan, something that could really be an umbrella that connects all of these pieces together, the places, the libraries, the streets, the rec centers, and the community stewards, the people who are going to help activate these. And a plan could help do that in a coordinated system. It could help us methodologically assess assets and gaps, identify where the biggest priorities are, help us figure out where to align social infrastructure and public realm investments with existing capital projects. It could help set measurable benchmarks and measures of success, so we actually know where are we getting the outcomes that we need. It would help figure out how do we actually deliver on this when so many different agencies and stakeholders are involved. What does the operations of this look like? And how do we actually have more sustainable models of community stewardship for the programming and activation of these sites, and then done in a way where communities are actually involved from the very beginning with the co-creation of them through to the programming. New York has a great culture of neighborhood planning. I think there are some planners in this room who lead them for DCP and other agencies. And we think this could build on the processes that already exist. But of course, cities are stretched right now, and doing all of this requires resources. So to raise the bar for these spaces, we really do need to expand on how we value the return on investment in social infrastructure, as well as who sees themselves as a key contributor to bringing these spaces to life. Eric mentioned that in the gaps, and we're really curious to see, how can philanthropy, how can those working in real estate, how can civic organizations be able to have a more meaningful role in helping to fill these gaps. And that's important because we all benefit, and we benefit in different ways. And we know that when communities have strong, high-quality social infrastructure, it leads to greater long-term tenancy in properties. It leads to more safety, more trust. There's so many spin-off benefits of these. So how can those who all have a stake in shaping these spaces actually contribute to them as well? And as mentioned earlier, how can the civic organizations that are doing so much, want to do more, be able to do so in a more consistent way? And I think, as Eric also mentioned, we understand there's a lot of priorities out there right now related to meeting people's urgent needs, related to housing, affordable food, affordable childcare. So, where does this fit in the order of priorities? And there's two essential ways. One, often these things that are referenced as key to an affordable, livable city, they have to land somewhere in place. And social infrastructure can be where childcare happens, where affordability actually shows up. And transit and streets can be a big part of this network too. But the other piece is that this is about the social fabric itself. These are the spaces where trust is built, where resiliency is formed, and really where we experience democracy in a very everyday way. So, while there is so much attention on this topic and maybe appreciation for it, we still see an opportunity to really value that to invest in these places is to really commit to a social fabric that underpins more equal societies. So we want to bring these different sectors together and see how they can act together at scale, with government setting the direction and the guidance, philanthropy catalyzing and supporting innovation, communities continuing to do the stewardship and the programming and the activation, but potentially being involved in more of the co-creation and involved from the beginning through the activation. That might be social cohesion stewards in each neighborhood, the way community boards have community planning people to help with assessing community planning needs. And then developers, how can we actually invest in more, or show that investing in social cohesion is something that they can contribute to as well. We have a lot of ideas on this, but we have some esteemed practitioners in the room, so we're not going to dwell on the details, and we're going to let you comment on how this actually gets done. So at the end of the day, before I pass it off, I think, we just want to emphasize that social infrastructure delivers essential services, meaningful connection, and moments of joy, and that investing in these places is really investing in the social fabric of our cities. And right now, we really need that more than ever. So thank you all for being here. And yes, this is, as Eric mentioned, we had so many community partners, community researchers on this team, so wanted to make sure that we gave them a shout out. Thank you if anyone else is in this room. And then we have our esteemed panelists, so I'll hand it back to you, Eric.
Okay, thank you, Julia. That was terrific. Julia, why don't you join up there? We have another mic here. I told you I'm playing a few roles. This is me as moderator. And thank you. Louise, I know that actually running a city agency tasked with getting us ready for summer, for instance, means that you have an especially busy schedule at the moment, and I heard you might have a hard stop when you have to run, so I'm going to let you, I'm going to ask you to go first. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric and Julia, for inviting us. And I have to say, it's really special to see this report come out. I've been a longtime fan of your work, Eric, from Palaces for the People and back to Heatwave. About the
Old school.
Old school. I'm from Chicago, too. So if you haven't read Heatwave, it's a lot about what, social resilience, or you can describe it, but. Anyway.
No, so they can't hear you, and thank you.
Okay.
But you got to really speak into the mic. In fact,
Got
why don't
it,
you take
okay.
this one, 'cause it's really working more.
Okay. I can be more, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
right.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Was just, giving Eric a shout out for his seminal book, Heatwave, which really has been a foundational text for how many cities have started to think about heat resiliency and how does land use and social infrastructure and all of these other aspects of our urban fabric really play into the way that we can prevent unnecessary deaths during these extreme temperatures. The report is so great to see a lot of the ideas that Julia, we've been talking about this for some time of what does it look like to pull all these things together for our public spaces and our public realm to support people. And in preparing for this and looking at your recommendations, I'm actually going to start, this is not like Mamdani administration canon, but so bear with me a little bit. But my best friend, Daphne Lundy, who some of you may know, and I have a creative side project called Romantic Urbanism, and it is our a prompt to explore what would it look like for cities to prioritize love, care, and connection in policymaking as with the same level of seriousness as we prioritize affordable housing, good transit, good jobs, all of these things that we consider core ingredients of life. And when I read the report, it really reminded me of some of those things that we've explored. And one of our activations with some partners has been a speculative bureaucracy called the Department of Tenderness that really kind of digs into what would it look like for government to actually do this? And it's a little bit unnerving in a way because we don't want government in our relationships in some way, but we already are in that business, right? The way that we design our public spaces, the way that we invest in our libraries and in our schools and in all of these other, the way that we even build our tax code really affects the way that, in our housing, affects the way that we relate to one another. Anyway, and so I was thinking
Sorry, I'm very excited about the headline coming out from the journalists here.
I know, right?
Mamdani administration to appoint new czar of tenderness. The tenderness czar.
So this is not administration canon. This is, but I think it is an interesting prompt to then think about what does it look like to actually translate some of these goals into practice, both in terms of the way that we're looking at, our physical infrastructure design and our investments in people. And I wanted to highlight, a couple of things. From a climate perspective and a resiliency perspective, I've been really excited to think about that connection between the climate crisis and the cost of living crisis and all of the other crises, Eric, that you mentioned up at the top, because what it looks like for us to deliver universal public goods, whether it's childcare or grocery stores or other kinds of programs that anyone can benefit from, really creates that bridging that we were talking about. How do we then make things available to people regardless of your neighborhood, your race, your class, your economic, status. And these are the kind of, building blocks that we can then use as public goods to then to then invest in our social infrastructure. And so when it comes to climate change and thinking about the way that extreme weather and that our a just and equitable transition needs to look like, I wanted to highlight a couple of initiatives that I'm really excited to prioritize in our administration. One is around greening our schools. Our schools are really, that's not explicitly mentioned, but like libraries, public school systems are where every kid can go for free to get an education, K through 12. And what does it look like to integrate resiliency hubs? What does it look like to really green those spaces, make them healthier and safer and more comfortable for kids to learn? So I'm really excited to work with our partners at the School Construction Authority and DCAS and our public school system to really think about that as we are investing in our public school system. I've also been excited to highlight a program that our office, the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, leads called Climate Strong Communities. This is a program where we are doing very deep dives with neighborhoods across the city. I think we've got about over 20 neighborhoods that we've worked in already, and a new crop of upcoming neighborhoods for this coming year. And it's really to think about what that holistic set of needs are in a community. We don't lead single issue lives as New Yorkers. We experience climate and housing and transit and affordability as entire people. And so our Climate Strong Communities program brings together all of the different city agencies, community organizations to uplift some of the needs, and then really translate that into securing real funding to do real projects. So if we're in a neighborhood and heat and flooding and housing are a really big deal, then we're thinking about how do we bring together those agencies, seek funding, whether it's from city capital or grant funding or our state partners or others, and really think about that from a physical infrastructure as well as a programmatic perspective. So we tie to other programs in the city that do focus on social resilience, like the New York City Emergency Management Strengthening Communities program that actually builds capacity for community organizations. You do not have to be a registered 501c3. You could be a group of neighbors who want to come together and learn how to do preparedness planning, and the city can then call on you to activate our social infrastructure when the same way that we call on our fire department and our infrastructural agencies when we are forecasted to have a storm or a heat wave. And so I'm excited to kind of think about these things in a holistic manner and really appreciate the work that you all did to so clearly articulate that vision of what we're solving for, and to be kind of centralizing that in the kind of policymaking that we're doing. So anyway, I'm going to leave that there. That was a lot, enough for now.
It's good, but before I hand it over to Maria, I just want to say, for us, the language of social infrastructure is really important, and one of the reasons that we kind of landed on it is it's been our observation, not just in New York City, but cities everywhere. They do their budgeting for the things that are really important, and then if there's anything left at the end, it's like parks gets some change, and maybe libraries, although maybe we'll have a budget cut for libraries this year, maybe not, these schools oftentimes suffer in these situations. It's kind of the realm of city making and city policy that we're talking about has been an afterthought or secondary for too long, and the gambit of relabeling this as a kind of infrastructure is that we know that the infrastructure conversations are tend to be primary. And we value infrastructure because we know the city can't work without transit, right? The city can't work if the electricity is failing. And if you look at the country, or even parts of New York City, it's hard to conclude that the society level stuff is going well. We haven't gotten the social blob for the political theorists here. We haven't gotten the social part right. And we think that the kind of cohesion, the trust that we're going for, it relies on a kind of infrastructure. So it's nice to hear you talk about it in that context, even, because it belongs in that space, right? It belongs in the conversation with the other serious stuff. It can't be an afterthought. Maria.
Thank you. I love the Department of Tenderness. There might be an old EO that you can just use that's lying around in city government somewhere. But first, I appreciate everyone being here. These are many of you I've gotten the chance to work with. I know you are leading incredible research, incredible projects. You are living this. You know a lot of this to be the reality, to be kind of truth in New York. And you could be anywhere. I think you could be at the Met Gala, but you're here. This is like the Met Gala of social infrastructure. I'm very appreciative of that. But I think it's interesting to me to hear and see the research and to be able to talk about it, because I think what it names and what it deepens is our understanding of something that we all here, at least in this room, know intuitively, but as well, we all know doesn't get the seriousness that it deserves. And that social infrastructure is not a set of amenities, that it's not peripheral, that it's in fact essential to a functioning city and a functioning democracy. But also that it doesn't have to be a set of aspirational, maybe one day we can get there. There are some very practical and realistic recommendations and ways to think about this work. And so I wanted to just make a few reflections in that vein, kind of what it might take to get us from all agreeing that this is important to actually seeing the type of change inside and outside of government. I think that the first thing, when I think about the change that's needed, it's not just about one project. You know, one great park, one great library, housing model is fine, but that's obviously not sufficient. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a real change in the systems. And what that requires is an understanding and willingness, both inside and outside of government, to actually think about this as a network. And the reality we're confronting is a hard one. The city org chart is organized by different agencies that on their best days work together, but we all know that that can be elusive, not because people don't care about their work. I know if you're in the Department of City Planning, you really care about those issues. If you work at the Parks Department, you're killing yourself on those issues. But that you see yourself as part of this network of social infrastructure is not always the case, let alone that you organize yourself from a policy, from a budget, from a programming perspective. So that's a mountain to climb, but is possible if we start really thinking about this inside and outside of government as a system to be moved and changed and resourced properly, versus a loose federation of things, and here's like the umbrella way to talk about it that feels intuitively right, but won't actually lead to the type of action that we want. But by the way, that also means the world outside of government has to confront some real issues. And I know it's hard. Now that I'm in philanthropy, we've had the great fortune of partnering and funding a number of amazing organizations in the library space, in the public realm space. And it's hard enough. Say all the public realm organizations. If you're part of a public realm organization, loosely defined, raise your hand, right? It's hard enough to get you all thinking of yourselves as one ecosystem. Think about weaving that with all of the other libraries and other forms of social infrastructure. I say that not to be negative, but part of getting out of what constantly, I'm sure, feels like the Hunger Games of the budget process, right? And getting attention is a transformation on both ends, inside and outside of government, about thinking of this as not peripheral but essential, not just aspirational, but completely and infinitely doable. The second reflection is, which I see in the report, and I think it's a very helpful one, is to not see this as disembodied from the overall affordability agenda. There are, of course, trade-offs. I lived it every day with rezonings, with the City of Yes, trying to balance, certainly not getting it right every day, the need for housing for New Yorkers and the need to invest in the places and spaces that make for strong, complete neighborhoods. But the affordability mission, and this might be heretical as someone who's, is a houser in her heart, it's not just about affording the rent. It's also a question of whether the places that allow you to feel that sense of belonging, whether those places are accessible to you. Because if they are not, then your city might be quote unquote affordable, but it's inaccessible in a deeper, in a more existential way. The third reflection that I'll make on this, so we need to think about systems inside and outside of government, tie it to the affordability agenda because it is part of what makes this city great. We talk a lot about buildings and architecture, but the other day I was at an event and someone mentioned what makes New York City great is not the glass and the steel, it's the flesh and blood of New York, right? So that I definitely believe, and that is part of this mission. And so it's kind of the so what? So what does it mean to get this to scale? What does it mean to get people to care? What does it mean to get the philanthropic, those in philanthropy or in real estate to not think of these as individual projects or to not think of these as amenities that accrue to the benefit of a small group of people in any particular neighborhood? And that is the provocation, the invitation for everyone here. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but it gets to some of what's been named. To think about this as essential, to think about the unglamorous parts of what we need to confront, from indemnification issues for the great stewards of our public spaces. We've been fighting this fight for way too many years. I apologize for that. But it also means not just funding capital, but funding programming. But I think we're in a moment, sadly, I think we're in a moment where maybe some years ago, discussions of a crisis in connectivity or the fragility of our democracy may have seemed kind of precious, but we're in a different place. And to get to the other side of that, I think is infinitely possible. And the folks in this room, and more importantly, those who you might bring along for the mission, can dictate how long we are in this period and can collapse the distance between today and we are in a time where there is a Department of Tenderness, where there is a plan on social infrastructure, where we think about the measure of how great our city is as not how high it rises, but whether it actually connects people and who gets to share in that connection.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Maria, I just wanted to respond to something that you said that really resonated with me, just about this infrastructure being essential and not something that's just a luxury, nice to have amenity. And, when we're doing budgeting, it's very easy for a lot of these kinds of things to fall to the wayside. But when it comes to real moments of crisis and emergency, this is where this kind of infrastructure really actually holds us together. After Hurricane Sandy, which is when I began my career in New York City government under your leadership at EDC, it was very clear that government at all levels were not moving as fast as community was organizing themselves. And just to use, to zoom into one neighborhood, Red Hook, which was devastated by Sandy, when the hurricane happened, the National Guard took a little bit more time to come to Red Hook than I think neighbors wanted. But Red Hook Initiative, which is a community-based organization that's been rooted there for a long time, they had already invested in mesh Wi-Fi networks. They had already invested in being a hub for the community. They were a go-to trusted resource. They had some flood protection in place before that was even a standard thing that people were doing in the floodplain that we were requiring, actually. And when the National Guard came in, they kind of, in a moment of surprise, were like, you guys are actually light years ahead of us. And that's where I think we need to be, like how we need to be investing, where it's really, there's things that government services need to deliver. And there's no, we don't want to abscond that responsibility of the kind of infrastructure that we put in place for emergencies like this. But then there's also investing in just the groups that are already doing that work and bringing them into the fold of our government work, rather than having that be something that's completely separate and aside. And that goes to, kind of the first thing you were saying about inside and outside, and how do we start to align those things together. So I just really appreciated that. And anyway.
It's great to hear that, because it's a bit of a sociological observation you just made, and it's exactly what we're trying to do here. I think there are these big conversations about, wither democracy, and what about the crisis of connection, and like I'm all for not letting kids use their phones all the time, but that's not going to solve the problems that we're talking about here. And there's a material life to the nature of our connection. Like we are materialists in a different sense. Like we have to build these physical places, and what we see from going out on the ground during crises and the aftermath of crises like Sandy, but also in the everyday life of the city, is that if you have access to an amazing gathering space that is going to be the source of fun and play and deliver some joy to your life, you're not just going to feel a little happier about that stuff. You're much more likely to build relationships that become trustful, that develop into something more like a community, which is a fuzzy word for the social scientists here, but something we care about. And I often will ask people, like, think about a playground. Like, if you live in a neighborhood where there's a great playground, especially if you have children, like it's transformative, right? I mean, it's a place where you can get, if you're a parent, so you get all this information about what's happening and which schools you should apply to and where to find a daycare that could work, what kind of programs you're eligible for. If you live in a neighborhood where you can't get to a playground, it's very hard to reproduce that, right? And that's a kind of quintessential piece of social infrastructure that just kind of doesn't get the recognition it deserves if it's just a subset of the parks conversation. So figuring out like how we name these things and recognize their value to our daily lives and then integrate that into the policy, like that's very much what this report is about. And that's why it's been such an honor for us to have both of you here. And we're learning a lot from your comments. Speaking of comments, we want to open it up to you. I recognize that there's a lot of brilliant people here with a lot of insights. Even before I could get to the part where I was going to say, now we're going to take some questions, a hand already shot up. So I can tell the participation is going to be high. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to have two mics. We're going to take a few questions together. Someone's going to need to make a comment, I know that. And you can make a little comment for sure, but we do have some really fascinating people with a lot of experience here, and I would like to give them a chance to answer questions. So we prefer questions. Before we get to the questions, though, Milan, could you stop there for a second? Mike, could you stop? I actually really do think it's important for you to see the people who are behind this really massive work of social science and planning. So Milan and Mike and Matt and Nan from the Institute for Public Knowledge, if you don't mind just standing up and all four were really key parts of this work, and we're going to be like if you ask the right question, they're going to call up. They're going to get called up and answer. And then from Team Gel, we have Candace and Precious and Eamon in the back there. If you could just raise your hand, Eamon, if you mind standing up. For those of you who work in universities know it really is unusual to have a partnership between a design firm and a group of social scientists that doesn't just get together for a seminar, but like works on a collaborative project. We did a lot of stuff that drove them completely crazy. It's not easy to work with academic social scientists. Candace is like, yeah, that's true. But I think we were able to do something very special, and hopefully with some legs because of it. So, okay, enough for me. No, Gel people are amazing, as you could tell. Milan, maybe you could do one side here, and then Mike, you can work the other side. This man here had his hand up even before I think I started the conversation tonight, so we're going to start with you. If you don't mind just doing it, you could please stand up, quick introduction, who you are, and then just be mindful that there's a lot of people who want to talk.
It's working? Yes. Gonzalo Casal's Cultural and Arts Policy Institute. I have a very genuine question, actually two. One is why culture and arts never appear as a resource for this work and cultural and arts sector as a partner. And I'm talking about there's probably 4,500 cultural organizations in New York City from the Met and the Gala, but also the group of Ecuadorian families that get together at the open street in Jackson Heights, right? And I'm sure we're doing something wrong. I have a long list, but I want to hear from you. And the second one is for Maria in particular. Hola, Maria. You oversaw, the Department of Cultural Affairs, and now you're in private philanthropy. Probably the word that we resource culture is also wrong. It's patronage and not as an infrastructure. I want to hear what you have to say about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to the other side of the room. There were 5 million hands a second ago. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ellen Baum. I am the Brooklyn Bridgealante. I've been cleaning the Brooklyn Bridge of trash and locks since about February. And I've been thinking a lot about creative choice architecture in that I can't stop people from doing that, and they're demonstrating their love or sentimentality or whatever, but it's not good for the bridge or the East River. And so what do you think about kind of trying to preserve that social architecture of the bridge itself while also trying to curtail the behavior by creating something else or somewhere else for them to do that? Because I know if I just say stop, then I'm a curmudgeon. But I'm just interested in your perspective on preserving, the heart of it while changing it for the better.
Great, thank you. And Mike, just behind you in the blue hat.
Thank you. Very quickly, mainly a question on climate. How can we turn the climate crisis into an opportunity and use climate funding to drive social infrastructure investment, sponge city, et cetera, et cetera? I'm actually trying to work on a fund to do something like that. So that's a little plug, but a question really to Louise about that.
Okay, and maybe we'll just do one more question. There's a woman here in the back.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm very interested in the resilient acquisitions being proposed, and I was wondering, are there going to be new parks being created, and what have we learned from resilient acquisitions post Sandy?
Great. Okay, so a bunch of specific and general questions there. Just start on the cultural and arts organizations. I think we do have some culture and arts organizations in the research project, so we didn't present everything tonight. I should have said this earlier, but the report itself, which is really just the first of many publications that will come from this, is now available online. And I don't know, Mike, if we can send a link to the report to everybody who's RSVP'd, or maybe already, is there a QR or something? There's a QR back there. There's a QR back there. For instance, a QR code back there. I think of libraries as cultural organizations. The Education Alliance runs a lot of arts and culture programs. This is not a comprehensive study of every kind of social infrastructure site in every part of New York City. Funders in the room, we would love to do that. Come back for more. There's an appetite. There's an audience. There's not. Right, we're way beyond capacity here tonight. I do have to say, I want all of us to register the fact that so many of us are interested in this and engaged. It's really hard for us to get 30 people for a night at IPK. We have Pulitzer Prize winners come in, and it's hard to get 40 people for that. And so, I take this as an expression of a collective interest in figuring out, together, how we can make this city that we share and other communities that are around us work better and feel better. And it's a supplement to this conversation about affordability, right? It's a part of it. And I really appreciate the way you both framed it. So yes to culture and arts, and we would love to work with you to make sure that it's part of the conversation. It has to be. Okay, do you want to pick up anything from there, Maria? Yeah.
I'll just add on the role of philanthropy. And when I was thinking about myself social infrastructure, I definitely included in my mind cultural institutions. Now, cultural institutions in and of themselves, as you know, Gonzalo, are the performing arts versus the visual arts versus the SIGs versus the smaller it's certainly not a monolith. I think it'll be interesting. It would be interesting to see if some of the statistics hold with cultural institutions. Do 86% of them feel like they belong? Does it depend? How does that change? So I know that's a research question, but on the solution side, if we get most of it right, with the planning to include parks and streets and libraries, but don't think about cultural institutions, then I think that would be an incomplete way, both on the philanthropic side and on the policy side, to think about what a network approach might be. But you, more than anyone, then it gets even harder, right? And so partly, I think there's a role that can be in sharing this research with policymakers more generally, because I think it's you have so much that you are doing if you're at EDC or at DCLA that's just keeping the engines running, that you can feel that you are part of a community of practice, that there is research behind it, that there are some ways to think about, do this work together, I think would actually be pretty transformational. Yeah. And so there's a lot of ways this work, I think, can be socialized and wrestled with, so that we can see the impact of it from a policymaking and programmatic perspective.
Great.
And to build off of that, Maria, one thing I want to highlight is the World Cup that's coming up. And I think I bring that because it weaves together a lot of the themes that I'm hearing from the questions and also a lot of the themes from the report.
You mean the access and affordability themes? Is that
the whole thing, quite frankly, it's an affordability issue, but it also, when during the election, when we were ideating World Cup policy, actually, one of the things that the mayor said to me that has really resonated is he was like, I want to catch up to where New Yorkers are already at when they celebrate the World Cup. Yeah. And I think about that because when we're thinking about our cultural investments that we're making as a city, New Yorkers, there's so much rich culture that we have, and there's, just to use the World Cup as a small, example of this, people are already in the streets. Like you go to Queens, anywhere in Queens, they've got their TV plugged in and outside the barbershop. They are watching the game. They're already pouring into the streets. They didn't get a SAPO permit. That is very annoying to get, as somebody who has tried. But the mayor was like, how do we actually catch up to that? How do we actually encourage more of that? And it becomes an issue of economic development. How do we support local businesses? How do we support tourism? How do we make sure that this mega event that's coming to our city can actually benefit New Yorkers? How do we support the social infrastructure of those public spaces to catch up to how New Yorkers are already wanting to celebrate the World Cup? And how do we make sure that it's accessible and affordable and it's for the people? The $5 tickets are just one piece of that. But then what I like about how this is kind of playing out is it requires so many, I want to say we have in the same way that our emergency management team convenes dozens of agencies for emergency events, we actually have a similar convening for all agencies that touch on anything relating to World Cup. And so we have, it's a regular standing call that we have. It's, there's a lot of public safety issues, there's a lot of space management issues, et cetera. Anyway, all to say, I think this is an interesting moment for us to build that muscle of actually coordinating with ourselves better and coordinating with the New Yorkers who want to participate in this better. And then how do we translate that into systemic policy change? How do we actually reform SAPO to make this work? How do we actually have more open streets? How do we support community organizations managing those open streets? All of those are structural changes that we're piloting right now. And so anyway, that's kind of what I'm thinking about as far as how to make it lasting.
As a soccer fanatic, I would love to see the parks opened up with giant screens in the way that Madison Square Park has
Viewing
this screen.
sites have been announced. There's going to be
I didn't know
five in
but there should be lots of them. So that would be a beautiful thing. Let me say on your climate question, because I just wrote this long piece about sponge cities. I mean, I think these projects have to go in tandem, and I think one way, and we're going to wind up paying for a lot of new social infrastructure sites, is that we have no choice but to adapt to this new climate that we're in. I mean, the water's coming, the heat is coming. We're going to be spending enormous amounts of money. There's already pools of money available, obviously much less at the federal level than there was 4 years ago, but that's going to change. I mean, it's going to change inevitably because the climate just is coming. So, as we start to adapt, we can do it with giant walls, or we can do it with social infrastructure. And I think the story about the rain that I wrote is also a story about how we can build parks that are like first-class parks that bring people together in new ways. The story of Rebuild by Design, which happened after Sandy, that's built so much extraordinary infrastructure, including this new park on the Lower East Side, is let's not just build a wall on the East River. Let's develop an amazing piece of social infrastructure, and tremendous ideas have gone into that from this university and from this community, and I think we've really become a model, but we have so much more that we should be investing in it. Julie said our first recommendation was to supercharge libraries, and that's not just because I love libraries as an abstract thing. It happens that there's a branch library in just about every neighborhood of New York City. And those libraries do a tremendous amount of work already, but they could be supercharged, by which we mean not just longer hours and better staff, but every library in the city should have a wireless mesh network. So if there's a heat wave or a hurricane, you can go there for communication. And every library in the city should be welcome to people all the time, so they develop a sense of comfort there, and then if disaster strikes, they should be able to go there to know that they'll be able to convene with their neighbors. They should have backup generators, so if you have power outage in your neighborhood, you could go to the library. Like when disaster strikes, people want to go to a place that feels comfortable, where they feel safe, where they're going to be supported. A high school gym that gets opened up as an emergency relief center is not any of those things, but a branch library is. So why reinvent the wheel when really for a little bit more money, we have this incredible set of social infrastructure in all of our neighborhoods. We think that there's tremendous possibility for doing something there. The Revson Foundation has been a leader in this for a long time in New York City. So we'll be pressuring Maria a lot after tonight to support this work. Should we take another round of questions? Let's go to the way back and support some of the people who are standing. But it's amazing that you're all back there. I want to go all the way to the back, Milan. Yep, the guy with the 2 hands. This is the longest range question we've ever fielded at IPK.
All right, thanks so much. I've been here, I think last time, or the first time rather, was 2010 with Project for Public Spaces. Sorry, I'm Daniel Latore. Here I started digital placemaking at Project for Public Spaces, and currently doing things as the Wise City and working with Blaze Backer over there on a Common Steward Collective that we're creating together. So this is more about the digital question. So since 2010, and it was happening back then, was all the conspiracy stuff about like Network 21, and that's still today in remixed version form about fear-mongering against 15-minute cities. So in the work now and in the past, the digital layer, how we mediate, how we make our work legible, how we make practitioners' work legible, let alone institutional articulations of practice legible, because we need all of that to be much more legible. But all of these good efforts, I feel like what we've seen could be, you could have all the best intentions, the policy put in place, and then all it takes is Elon Musk to spool up something about New York and 15-minute cities and whatever, social engineering, and then it all gets ruined because we don't have the capacity to counter frame through really savvy digital literacy. So I'm just wondering, where is that in this? Can that be next? Can we get funding for that? How can we organize that level of practice?
Great, thank you. I see a hand back, Mike, behind you. Did I see a hand? No? I thought I saw a hand back. Yeah, that's the hand I thought I saw.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is about a team that was at Department of City Planning, essentially made up of urban designers that thought about these things day to day, social infrastructure, how it could coexist, how public realm could connect, how it could connect back to the people, in addition to the delivery of units. That team no longer exists. Can you sort of respond to that and how that should be related to the opportunities that the city is looking at for social infrastructure?
Okay, I see some more hands up here. Yeah, just right there in the black.
Hi, I
If
just
you,
had a
if
quick
you don't
question.
mind standing up and just introducing yourself quickly, and I see you in the green in the front.
For Louise, specifically about there. I know Boston has an office for civic belonging, or no, sorry, civic organizing. I'm wondering if there's any talk about any sort of office for social infrastructure or office for civic belonging within the city.
Great, and then we have just one more question here in the green, and then we'll.
Thanks. I'm Eduardo from Alliance for Paseo Park in Jackson Heights, so thanks for shouting out our open street. My question comes in, there's two parts. We as an organization are struggling in where the funding comes when it comes to maintenance. We are not a commercial district, so in the way that how we bring money in to be able to keep our park going or the transformation of our park going is one of our biggest struggles. That's one. And then, I think a big part of social infrastructure, as you've mentioned, is public space. And there's many types of public space, most of it, or a lot of it owned by DOT, parks. How do we get all those agencies to think and kind of prioritize the same when it comes to delivering open space to our city?
Great questions. Louise, I know that you have to run at some point, so maybe you want to take the first stab, and then if you need to bow out, we can thank you then. Yeah.
Thank you. I unfortunately don't know the decision behind the DCP thing, so I can't speak to that. But I do want to talk about the question about civic engagement. Boston also has a cool Office of New Urban Mechanics that I love as well, which is like a way of sort of like innovating within city gov, and I think that's a really cool model. But we, in this new administration, just created an Office of Mass Engagement, leveraging the spirit and infrastructure that we built during the campaign into governing. The Office of Mass Engagement actually just announced, was it this week, last week? I can't remember, their big new campaign organizing tenants to be able to go before the Rent Guidelines Board and testify. We won't tell you what to say or anything like that, but really just to build that civic literacy of here's how you participate in government. And that's something that I think is really exciting and interesting. Of course, during the campaign, the mayor electrified so many New Yorkers, and how do we then find a home for them in governing? I think that's a real question of what it means to have enduring participation in civic life. So I'm really excited for that and really excited to work with my colleagues there. And I love the question on digital infrastructure too. I don't know the answer, it's not my area of expertise, but it feels like digital public spaces have eroded in a way that I don't know. It's really given me a lot of food for thought. Like I grew up in the era of like Tumblr and like Zanga, and like I don't know. It's really interesting to see how like digital public spaces have really evolved over time.
Yeah. While you're still here, one of the things, and I've spoken to a couple of folks in this room about it, whether one has liked and has thought that the previous housing plans were effective or not, I'm putting that aside for the moment, but when the housing plans have been put together, it was an attempt to get all of the relevant housing and housing proximate agencies and say, here's what this administration wants to do on housing. Again, different approaches, and some initiatives, some approaches more effective than others. As I've been thinking about the world of not just parks and not just public space and public realm, it would be, and I know there have been different versions maybe of this in the past, but if there were a true city master plan on the public realm that didn't just force conversation, but most importantly, force decision-making and prioritization, that I think would be pretty transformational for the city, not to give more homework, but that's what we had to do on the housing front. And because it's at the end of the day, there are finite dollars. Because the one thing, and you mentioned maintenance and stewardship, and I know there are organizations here who we're working with who are mapping all of the many different types of stewards in different neighborhoods for public space. And you are governed by the rules of a DOT versus a parks versus a DOE versus an EDC versus God knows what. And each of those gives you more or less flexibility on generating revenue, on indemnification, on all of these issues. And so there too, I think there is room to be more coordinated, but also on the other end, not in government but to also mine for what has worked in terms of revenue models, to share those out so we don't reinvent the wheel, to get philanthropy and the private sector more generally interested in supporting those many different ways that there are organizations who are stewarding this. The last point that I'll make, when you were asking about digital, actually my mind went in a different direction. My mind went in the direction of any good effort can be well-intentioned, the right policy, but as you mentioned, can be derailed if the narrative is not invested in and broadly shared, and also if something in the external world. And so I think a big part of this, there's the research, there's the policy response, but what is the enduring narrative, not just a communication strategy, but the storytelling around this, and also what's the political advocacy? Because we may not like it, but the work of the budget, the work of which pieces of legislation, that still lives in the world of small p politics. And so that too, for the major actors outside of government, that's a set of questions and strategies that have to be developed in order for this to be what we want it to be, comprehensive, systemic, and enduring.
It's great, and I think a real challenge for those of us who care about social infrastructure is that built-in people's lobby is not there right now, right? We are as splintered as the organizations that are handling this, so we can tell that there's an appetite for it, the concept resonates, people appreciate its significance. You know the difference between living in a neighborhood with rich social infrastructure and living in a place that doesn't have that. But it's hard to translate that into the push to keep our elected officials, accountable and hearing us. It's hard to make the case that we need this kind of oversight and leadership. And so, part of I think what we're hoping to do with this report and with this project more generally is to provide a shared vocabulary and maybe even a set of talking points, or just a spark for further conversations that you could all take with you into the daily work that you do, because this is one of those things that's not going to get settled in the university, as many people as we have here. But we at the Institute for Public Knowledge, feel really excited to develop partnerships with all of you to work on this, and we do think that there's real potential for us to do something here. I know, Louise, that you have to run, but I think also it's getting close to 7:30, and what I'd love to do is give you all a little bit of time just to talk to each other. There's a map up in the back where people are posting information about their favorite social infrastructure sites. And a lot of you have been generous with giving us your ideas and recommendations. And if you want to stop one of us before your night ends, we'd love to hear from you as well. So at this point, I want to just give one more personal thank you to all the people who made this project so rich and rewarding. And I want to thank all of you for being here. It really is meaningful to us after years of work to see so many of you show up and engage. We hope this is the first of many conversations. Most of all, thank you to Gail, and thank you to Louise and Maria for this great night.